My name is Sarah Crane. I'm with Moody's Analytics, which for the record is a separate company from Moody's Investor Services. So please do not let anything I say today be misconstrued as having any bearing on past, current, or future ratings actions. Every year, Moody's prepares a report for the State of Illinois Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability, which discusses the economic forecast and risk to the outlook for the state. I'll give you a brief overview of our outlook, and I'm happy to take questions afterwards. Illinois is underperforming the United States and its neighbors. The state will underperform going forward, but we expect that the gap will narrow. The three most important aspects of this outlook are demographics, manufacturing, and the uneven growth between Chicago and the rest of the state. In terms of demographics, the aging of the workforce is a problem all over this country, but is more acute in Illinois. The state's population shrank for a third consecutive year in 2016, and we expect it to lose more residents going forward. Weak population trends act as a speed limit on consumer industries such as retail and leisure and hospitality. However, leisure and hospitality has performed better than retail and will continue to do so, thanks to the strengthening national economy and more people visiting Chicago in particular. Population loss also impedes a more robust housing recovery, since the rate of household formation is below average. Housing will contribute more to growth in the next several years, however. Housing will contribute more to the economy in the next several years. Foreclosures and household balance sheets are improving and are back to pre-recession levels. An uptick in single-family house prices in recent months is fueling increased home building. Still, prices will not return to their pre-crash levels until the end of the decade, and the rate of housing starts will remain well below pre-crash levels through the forecast horizon. In terms of manufacturing, an obstacle for Illinois is its over-reliance on an industry in secular decline. This, too, is a widespread problem nationally, but is more severe in Illinois. One of the state's key industries, as you know, manufacturing of machinery, is dealing with external pressures from much lower commodity prices, a stronger dollar, and slow growth abroad. The good news is that these constraints will ease, but Illinois' large manufacturing presence will keep it an underperformer over the forecast horizon. Finally, weakness in manufacturing is exacerbating the performance gap between Chicago and downstate Illinois. Chicago's more diverse, dynamic economy is faring much better than its in-state peers, which is a trend that we expect to persist over the next several years. Chicago is supplying not only an outsized quantity of Illinois' new jobs, but it is improving job quality as well. A record number of people visited Chicago in 2016. Workforce additions in high-tech and science-based companies have powered growth in office industries, and better-paying positions will account for a higher-than-average share of net new jobs in the next several years. Still, Chicago faces the same demographic challenges as the rest of the state, which is why it stacks up poorly with other large population centers nationally. This is our baseline forecast, but there are several risks that could change the state's outlook. I will start with the negative risks so that we can end on a high note. The biggest threats relate to the state's budget problems and Illinois' weak demographics. Illinois' population is forecast to stabilize this year, but the risk is that this could take longer than we expect due to fiscal uncertainty and slower than average job growth. Households and businesses rely on stability in order to plan for the long term. The second group of risks pertains to factors that impact the market for machinery manufacturing. Since 2014, the real trade-weighted dollar has risen by about 1/5. The dollar will strengthen over the coming year, but if it climbs more than expected, it will weigh more on exports by making goods produced in Illinois more expensive overseas. This could happen due to a rapid rise in interest rates, stronger than expected inflation, or continued softness abroad, which weighs on current foreign currencies. Our forecast calls for energy and agricultural commodities to increase modestly over the next several years, But if this happens more slowly than expected, weak demand for machinery will weigh on downstate producers. For instance, OPEC may not pull back production as promised, maintaining a supply glut that pressures prices for oil. Finally, any reduction in trade or immigration will harm Illinois. Any policies that severely curtail immigration will hurt the state's population growth even more than expected, in addition to labor force growth. The state is very reliant on immigration to even maintain its population. To not totally bum you out, I'll now proceed to some upside risks to the forecast. Our expectations for manufacturing could prove too pessimistic if the dollar turns weaker than expected, or if energy and ag commodity prices rise more quickly than expected. If the Federal Reserve is less aggressive in raising interest rates, this is one way that could happen. In addition, enhancements to Chicago's vast transportation network could fuel better than expected growth. With upgrades underway at O'Hare Airport and many of Illinois' critical intermodal facilities, the transportation network is primed to take advantage of potential weakness in the dollar to accommodate more trade, business, visitors, and residents. There's also potential for more money becoming available for transportation investment if a major transportation bill passes Congress. The passage of a large infrastructure spending bill would also improve demand for Illinois-made construction equipment. In summary, Illinois will underperform the nation and the region, but there are upside in addition to downside risk to the outlook. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions from you or the committee.
You said it's Sarah?
Yes.
Okay, so a couple of housekeeping matters. Jim, we actually have your witness slip. I apologize. We have a oral opponent. I don't know if she mistakenly opposes the report fundamentally or philosophically, but she may have just, it's Patty Cavins, and she's prepared to order or offer written testimony. But we'd ask you to just, can you file witness slip so we have your name for the record? And then, do you have a written copy of your remarks?
I do.
Could you, at some point, get those to members of the committee so they can digest what you said?
Absolutely.
And then before we go to member questions, Jim, give us a little background on why you commission these. How do you do it every year? What does Kafka take from these reports? And then I think members will want to delve into the substance of the report.
Sure. By statute, we're required to provide the General Assembly a report on the state's economy. And we have utilized Moody's now for a number of years. They seem to do a good job in terms of laying out a broad perspective, as Sarah did, both pros and cons, moving forward, both near term and long term. We utilize their service and their report, along with our other econometric entities like Global Insight, to help us formulate our actual revenue estimate, which I'll get into a little preliminary look. We have a March 7th COGFA date scheduled for an official release of our estimates and economic forecasts, but I can discuss at least today where we see things headed. But so that's essentially how Moody's and their report fits into the Commission's role.
And you said you like Moody's work and you've used it continually. Can you, to the extent you can assess their ability to be successful in their predictions, has it been most of the time, some of the time? It's difficult because of obviously all of the various changes that have taken place in Illinois from a tax standpoint. You know, they look at things more from a macro level. They're not into the nitty-gritty dollars that COGFA is or Department of Revenue is. So in terms of how their work is utilized by us, it's more of a macro level. It gives us a sense of the direction they see things headed, as well as the order of magnitude, that type of thing. So from that standpoint, I mean, there are certain reports over the years where we look at their growth rates and we say, boy, that's kind of aggressive. How do you come up with that?
other instances where we may say, yeah, you're a little bit conservative over here. So, but it's their view, it's their take. We don't try to influence their report in any way. They do their job, they do it well, and what we take from it is are those things we feel better prepares us to forecast revenues moving forward.
Thank you. So with that, if members have substantive questions, and I'll finish with some substantive questions of my own. Spokesperson Harris.
Thank you very much. I read through your report, and obviously folks can pick out items in the report which they think are positive and which they think are negative, but a couple of things I wanted to ask about. I'm often amazed to hear my colleagues talk about the number of people leaving the state of Illinois. If I listened to my colleagues, I would think that half the state would be empty by now. Yet in your demographic trends, you indicate that the chart or the information at the back of the book indicates that the population change in Illinois from a year ago is only 0.2%. Is that, I mean, considered to be the population change in Illinois, 0.2%?
That's right, Representative.
Okay. And it strikes me that with all these people leaving, everybody's leaving and selling their homes. Who's buying their homes? And that's somewhat of a rhetorical question, but I look at the report published by the Illinois Realtors, and especially in the Chicago and 5-6 county area around Chicago, home sales are up, prices are up, so they seem to be relatively robust in that area. Is it fair to say that there's a difference between what's happening in the northern part of the state and what's happening in other parts of the state?
Representative, I would think that the reason for that difference is that there is greater rate of household formation in the northern part of the state, so people moving out of their parents' homes, feeling more secure in their job prospects, and buying homes that way. So it's not necessarily that there's a greater population buying homes, but that households are forming. So the millennials are getting better paying jobs, feeling secure enough to purchase a home or an apartment. A lot of the building and sales in the Chicago area are multifamily properties, so that would be the reason that the Chicago area is performing better.
Okay. Again, staying on the demographic trends for a second, you talk about net migration, and in the report it says, though for many years the largest number of the state's out-migrants headed to Indiana, where living costs are lower, retiree destinations Texas and Florida now rank as the first and second most popular destinations for relocating Illinoisans. Do you think that might have anything to do with the fact that it's warmer and there is no income tax in either one of those states?
Representative, I definitely agree with that.
Okay. And again, staying on the migration for a second, the report indicates that while we have had an out-migration in some of the, it says Illinois loses more residents to Minnesota, Missouri, Wisconsin, and Kentucky than it takes in, the trends have been stable over the last 2 decades. So that tells me that it's not like there's some great exodus happening, but rather that the trend has been stable. We may be losing to those states every year, but not at a great rate. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Helpful. And then lastly, I noticed when you talk about specifically, and I want to highlight this, you talk about specifically some of the sectors to look at regarding employment, and you mentioned tourism and conventions. You specifically state, or the report specifically states, Illinois tourism industry is expected to perform well. The industry has come back faster in the state than it has nationally, thanks almost entirely to more people visiting Chicago. Again, when I hear some of my colleagues talk, you would think that nobody would want to set foot inside of Chicago. Yet, Chicago welcomed a record 52.76 million visitors in 2015, on target for the mayor's goal of 55 million by 2020. And I want to highlight that because the impact that tourism has, and the impact, quite frankly, that our budget impasse is having on funding tourism programs in the state of Illinois, I think is a concern, as is funding in many other areas. But here's an area where it really, really does make a difference overall to the state, and I think we should focus on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll look through and maybe ask some more questions, but I appreciate that. Thank you.
Spokesperson Harris, I appreciate your rosy outlook on things. I hope that that continues throughout the spring session. Leader Neckritz.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I always look forward to your report every year, and because I find it very insightful and thoughtful. I don't know if you've done them in years past, but I think that I always find them really, really, really helpful. And one of the quotes that stuck out to me from years past, and I think this report and some of the questions that Representative Harris asked highlight that, which is we really do have this tale of two states here in Illinois. You've got the Chicago region and everything else. One of the things you said during your remarks was that something like that Chicago has growth in good jobs or something, like that. Could you repeat that for me and then tell me a little bit about what that means?
Sure. Representative, Chicago's base of high-paying jobs are growing at a faster rate in the past year, particularly the past 6 months. Wages are rising more quickly than they have in years past, which follows a national trend, but high-tech, professional services, high-skilled workers have more opportunities in Chicago these days. So that is fueling stronger than average income growth, which is impacting the entire state's average.
And how would that growth compare to other large municipalities or maybe some of our more our regional?
It is not growing quite as fast as its competitors. For instance, Boston, New York City, other large population centers. So that is a trend that has pretty much always been there, but it is for sure growing much better than its own history. So it continues the trend compared to other large population centers, but it is growing faster than itself has in recent history.
And that's happening despite our obvious fiscal woes right now.
That's right.
And it's happening despite the fact that we have not had the business-friendly reforms that the governor might be seeking. It's happening. It's happening. We don't have those reforms, obviously. It's happening. Okay. So one of the statements that's in the report is that Illinois' business climate outshines its regional rivals. But the state's shaky finances have some firms questioning whether they want to expand in the state or elsewhere. Can you talk a little bit about what those, how our business climate outshines our regional rivals, and then what you might be hearing about the fiscal situation here that's preventing people from investing?
Sure. Representative, Illinois actually performs or ranks better than states such as Indiana, Iowa, Michigan, Missouri, Ohio, Wisconsin in terms of its energy costs and its overall business or tax burden.
You know, that might be heresy, what you just said, what's sitting in this building, but
Well,
I love hearing it.
Where it doesn't stack up quite as well is its very high labor costs. And that has a greater than average, that has an outsized impact on total costs. So its high labor costs dwarf, in a sense, its advantages in terms of energy costs, office rents, and its state tax burden. Local taxes, however, shift that burden a bit higher. So if you were to dig deeper, which is something that we've done for other states, you might be able to pinpoint what exactly those differences are between Illinois and its neighbors.
And then in terms of the, like, what are you, on what do you base the statement that the state's shaky finances have prevented investment here?
Representative, the uncertainty that comes with not knowing what a business's future tax burden will be is what holds them back from expanding in the state or might encourage them to depart the state for an environment where they are more certain about what they will be paying. Residents will be more certain about what their own tax burden will be. So just that stability gives businesses and residents more confidence to invest in the state.
Thank you.
Representative Sims.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sarah, so let me make sure there was a point that you just made with, with Representative Neckritz relative to higher labor costs. So the labor costs are consistent of what? Salaries to employees, what benefits, what are those labor costs?
Those labor costs are salaries, any compensation to employees.
But those are salaries, correct?
That's right.
So the wages paid to Illinois workers are higher than our regional neighbors, is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. And then, and also let me go back to a moment for a point that Representative Harris made about the net migration. As a percentage of population, would it be fair to say that as a percentage of population, it's lower for out-migration to other states than it is for in-migration from those same states? Not in net numbers, but in net as a percentage of population.
As a percentage, that's hard for me to say right now. I do believe that as a percentage of population, Illinois is losing more residents than its neighbors.
Than its neighbors, okay. And when you talk about the demographics of the state, what are the demographic indicators that would say that Illinois that would produce a problem for our long-term economic growth? You mentioned that there were several demographic challenges that we face. What are those?
Representative, it would be the aging of the population and the lack of new working age residents to replace them in the labor force. So labor force growth is not as strong in Illinois. And then, of course, it would just be the out-migration to other states, which is happening across the country as folks move from the Northeast and the Midwest to the South and the West, which is the reason why Texas and Florida are gaining more of your residents these days. And that would be...
Would that, Sarah, would that also be a function of us not having, we have world-class universities. We also have a budget problem that does not allow for us to adequately invest in elementary, secondary, and higher education. So would that also be necessary for us to revamp the way that we are training workers to then be to make sure that they are prepared to go into manufacturing or to go into these other employment areas?
Sure. Representative, I think that the uncertainty that comes with not knowing whether universities will receive the amount of funding that they're expecting or will have to enact increases to tuition rates could lower students, could lower their attractiveness to potential students who might want to go to school in Illinois, remain in Illinois for their career.
Additionally, so if we had a full budget, what do you think would be the impact on residents and businesses throughout the state?
Representative, it would certainly provide a boost to confidence for businesses and residents to know what their future tax burden will be, how finances stack up. It is not so much the level or the rate of taxation or how the pension system is formed, but to just have a bit of certainty is what matters most to businesses and residents.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because looking at a National Federation of Independent Business report, and I looked at the factors that they talk about, the impact or the importance to business, and then I look at the things that have been holding up our ability to get a full budget, and I haven't seen several of those on that list. But what I have seen is certainty. What I have seen is the ability to have well-trained workers. What I have seen is making sure that we have individuals who are focused on growth and investment, but not necessarily some of the more political focused ideas that have been forwarded. Do you think that would be a fair statement?
I think that's a fair statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
A couple of matters for cleanup, and then I think we'll open it up to any remaining questions, and we'll get people on their way. So, Sarah, just on the out-migration, where people are going, you mentioned Texas and California specifically. Is there anything in those states that would make them more appealing besides the business climate to Illinois? In other words, are there demographic reasons? We've covered this, but just to be abundantly clear, are there demographic reasons people would want to move to warm weather climates? Are there any other reasons besides economic climate where Texas and California would have an advantage over Illinois?
Mr. Chairman, climate for sure is more appealing, especially as people in this country, as this country's population gets older. Like I said, the Midwest and the Northeast, they're all losing residents to the South and the West just because of their more retiree destination type places. I can't speak specifically to what other factors might be attracting people away from Illinois and into those states, but it is something that we have done for other states, and I'd be happy to speak with you offline if you're interested.
No, that's helpful, because I think we are under the impression that some of us get deluged with the idea that Illinois is a net out migration state because of simply factors that I think the testimony here today is rebutted nicely. Can you talk really briefly about the disadvantages downstate has versus the Chicago region? So I think one area where this chamber has struggled recently is deciding how to balance what works for Chicago and the Cook County and Collars region versus how we figure out how to rebound downstate Illinois with as the reliance upon coal diminishes, as manufacturing becomes less about manual labor and more about machinery. So do you have any sense of how other states versus Illinois have figured out how to turn around regions where those factors have taken place?
Mr. Chairman, Illinois is unfortunately so dependent on machinery manufacturing, which has been impacted by external factors. So a state like Michigan is lucky in that the auto rebound has allowed producers to produce many more cars. That has really helped them because they specialize in making vehicles. So Illinois could benefit from diversifying its manufacturing base, which is a longer-term project, but that would be the way to go.
Okay, that's helpful. Two quotes that I want to make sure we got right. Illinois business's climate outshines its regional rivals, but the state's shaky finances has some firms questioning whether they want to expand in this state or elsewhere. So I don't think I've ever heard any independent or subjective entity say that our business climate outshines their rivals. So that's heartening, but it would be nice to hear you flesh that out a little more in terms of what you mean by that.
Mr. Chairman, that statement is primarily based on a series of factors that we look at, which would be the cost of taxes, the cost of energy, and the cost of labor. And it is really the cost of labor that pushes Illinois a bit more expensive for businesses than in other states.
Inquiring minds want to know what's included in the cost of labor. Is it just wages?
It would be wages and compensation, and it's sort of a complicated set of Moody's Analytics estimates based on different data series from the BEA, the BLS. It does.
You're not having trouble, Sarah. Go ahead.
It doesn't include different insurance for workers. It includes what the worker takes home.
Just want to make sure I covered everything. Add Representative McSweeney to the role. Infrastructure. The state's distribution and transportation network will remain an integral part of the economy and help drive growth. Northern Illinois remains the nation's rail hub. Can you talk at all about what the effect of a major infrastructure investment in terms of a capital bill would do to the state's business climate?
Mr. Chairman, the road, rail, transit, and air infrastructure in Illinois is one of its greatest assets. And it's very crucial to businesses and quality of life factors, which would attract or retain residents. So increasing the share of the state budget that is devoted to maintaining and improving that infrastructure system would certainly benefit businesses in the state. The state's gas tax, which is the main source of road and transit construction funding, is among the lowest nationally and has not been raised since 1991. So increasing that and shoring up a greater amount of funds to devote to road and bridge construction and maintenance would certainly add to the appeal of Illinois' infrastructure.
Have any states that raised the gas tax experienced any peripheral economic negative effects? So weigh the value of using that to create economic investment versus the negative economic impact in other states that have done it to the extent you can, or to the extent you would be able to if they had.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not aware of any states that are suffering negative impacts from raising the gas tax, and in fact, in the past year or so, there have been about a dozen states that have increased their gas tax because they are realizing the importance of maintaining that road and bridge infrastructure.
Can you name some of them?
New Jersey, South Carolina, number of southern states. I would certainly be happy to do a deeper dive in that regard.
That you don't have to, but that's interesting. If you could get the list of states, that would
Sure.
be helpful. Any other questions? Go ahead, Representative Sims.
Yeah, many states are, if they have not already raised the gas tax, they're talking about doing so.
Okay, that's helpful information. Representative McSweeney.
Thank you very much for your testimony today. We lost 115,000 people in the state last year. Can you talk a little about what you see as some of the factors? You've done a good job, obviously, in the overall business environment and the role of taxation in that in Illinois as far as looking at the total burden on property taxes, income taxes, sales taxes. Is there any thought that you have about what really has created that exodus from the state of Illinois?
Representative, our stance is that it's the uncertainty that is driving people out of Illinois. Also, another thing that encourages businesses to expand in a state are quality of life factors. There are studies that show a relationship between quality of life factors such as public school quality and public safety and more dynamic business investment. So I can't speak specifically to what taxes in particular might be driving state or businesses out of the state, but it would certainly be the uncertainty that is causing a lack of confidence.
And is it fair to say, as you think about the business environment and planning, and I agree with you 100%, that the lack of a 5 to 10 year certainty on what the overall economic environment is going to be in the state has really impeded bringing new jobs and opportunity to the state. But as we talk about the budget, and just as a general matter, and I'm not asking you to specifically comment on any budget proposal or any specific cut, would you say from an overall attractiveness for keeping people in the state, for bringing new jobs, that it would be preferable for us to focus on spending reductions, if there are spending reductions that are, which I believe can be made, for example, in pensions and Medicaid and reforms in those areas, or raising marginal tax rates? What would you think, just as a general matter, is preferable as far as an overall certainty and economic environment going forward in the state?
Representative, a combination would probably be necessary, but businesses definitely consider the cost of taxes when they're making business decisions, so.
Thank you.
Representative Martwick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. So I had a question. I'm looking at the Index of Relative Business Costs on page 8 of the report, and I was wondering if you could offer any sort of explanation regarding some of these numbers, and not to dive too deeply into them, unless, of course, in your explanation you need to, but we talk about the Illinois outmigration. I'm wondering how it relates to this. Certainly, we could say, you've talked about Texas and Florida and retirement states, low taxes. Indiana, which has relatively lower costs, although it would seem a higher overall tax burden. And then, but by the same token, we have net outmigration to Michigan and Wisconsin, where it would appear that their costs of labor, tax, energy, and overall exceed Illinois, what would appear to be at least somewhat substantially. Can you offer any explanation for any of that?
Sure, Representative. While businesses do consider the overall tax burden when making decisions, they must also have certainty. So while some states may be more expensive to businesses, at least they know and are able to plan for the future. So that would be, I believe, why Illinois still suffers compared to these other states.
And then finally, a question that, and I apologize unless I missed it in the report, doesn't seem to be contemplated, and I'm wondering if you have, or if you could offer any explanation. My understanding is that from 2006 to 2016, Illinois, because of our escalating debt problems, cut spending in the areas of social services, education, and healthcare by roughly $7 billion out of our budget. Obviously, most of that spending going to different agencies, nonprofits, schools, whatsoever. $7 billion, that spending is probably, my guess would be, largely salaries for employees. So a $7 billion reduction means a substantial amount of jobs lost in that public or public spending sector, even if it's not technically government employees. We might be paying them to other agencies. What effect does that have on our economy? I know that Illinois ranks very low in terms of the number of state employees per capita. What effect has that had on our economy, that 10 years of austerity, as it were?
Representative, public jobs, state and local government employment is one of the largest portions of mid to high paying jobs. So losing those positions certainly weakens the overall strength in terms of job quality, it weakens Illinois' position. And it also weakens overall quality of life factors if the state of public education is not as strong as it could be due to cuts. Then families, households may not want to reside here. High-skilled workers may go elsewhere for education and to invest in their career.
Thank you. That's all I have for now.
Any other questions from members of the committee? Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Again, if we could have